We've been doing these podcasts for about a little over a year now. So thank you for being a part of our show. Thanks for being a part of this audience and the growth that we've been able to achieve. So really appreciate y'all. Over the last year, we've been doing kind of three kinds of shows. One was focused on the news, current events, things that are happening now in space. Um, the other kind of show was typically a deep dive into policy or a new report or a new document. Um, I tend to really like those. I think they're really important. The audience doesn't like them as much as I do, so that's something we just kind of have to acknowledge. And then the third is a show with guests. Um, Tonight we're gonna veer off course. We're gonna do something a little bit different. Um, I'll describe it in a moment. Um, the other thing that we've been doing for the last year is really focused. This show has been uh, very intentionally focused at that intersection of uh, national and international space policy, finance, operations, logistics, and of course, it all comes down to infrastructure. What are we actually building in space, in the sky? Um, and that's kind of led us to where we are this evening. Um, a couple months ago, about 4 months ago, 4.5 months ago, Liftport, um, we were a part of a accelerator, an incubator here in the Seattle region in Tacoma. Um, and that went pretty well, and we learned a lot in the process of doing that. This morning, I gave really my first ever pitch of the kind of renewed company of Liftport. Now, if anybody's been paying attention, we've been at this for a long time. There's the original space elevator days under NASA's umbrella, and then there's the first version of Liftport from 2000. Well, NASA was 2001, 2, and 3. The first version of Liftport was 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Everything crumbled after that. We restarted in 2012. That didn't last very long, 2012 and 13. And then we really restarted in 2018 to focus on the lunar elevator. And that's kind of where we are now. But as you know, during COVID, things really got messed up and we came pretty close to closing. So as a result, we pivoted into what we've been doing now, this media side, digital media, video media side of space. And that's been great. We are really happy about that. We've been happy to serve the 28 conferences that we've hosted. But it's time to get back to working on the lunar elevator. That's really what we aspire to. That's what we want to build. And so it's been really challenging for me individually, for the team as a whole, trying to figure out how do we get back to the place where we're building the infrastructure for the future. And between the business planning work that we did over the last summer and the pitch today, spoiler alert, the pitch didn't go great. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. They did give us homework, so there's some follow-up stuff there. So I'll keep doing that. But it's kind of made me think about, getting back to the basics, like who are we, what are we doing, how are we doing this? And that's kind of leading to where we are tonight. Now, I developed a tool set, a framework. I refer to it as the Numenia process. Over the last many, many years, going back all the way to the earliest NASA days, to the earliest versions of Liftport. When I realized a long time ago that that no one in the world knew how to build an elevator to space. No one in the world knows how to do some of the things that we're doing, building space stations, wanting to go to the moon, wanting to go to Mars. Nobody knows how to do this stuff. And so what I created was a framework to help us understand these really big ideas. And that's been pretty good. This Numenia process tool set, it came out of the earliest working on the elevator, trying to just wrap my arms around the bear of this new uncharted territory that I found myself in. When I went off to International Space University's Space Studies program, I refined a big portion of it back in 2008. I refined it some more, also under ISU in 2010 and 11. And then over time, even up until the last few months, I've refined it further and further and further. So what I decided to do tonight, partly because of the pitch today, and partly because I'm working with one client in the space community, the Mars Society, to work them through this Numenia process, and also because I know that several people in our audience either work for or run small nonprofits in the space sector, and so I wanted to just give this tool set to everybody. I've done this a bunch. This is kind of my side hustle. I do this as a set of courses, but I don't want to kind of keep it to myself. I want people to be able to use this thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and veer off course a little bit and showcase this tool set that we've got. Okay. Let me just do a screen share here. I'm going to skip some parts of it. I figure if you're on this channel, you already know my background, right? So I'm going to kind of skip some pieces of this. This actually started as a true story. My brother and I are identical twins, and we wanted a fish tank when we were kids. There was a garage sale. We wanted a fish tank. Our parents didn't want to buy the fish tank for us, so Mom convinced us to go out and build a lemonade stand. And surprisingly, it was quite successful, and we got the fish tank. That was my first toe into the entrepreneurial pool, and for that, I'm really grateful. There's a lot to that story. I'm going to skip most of it. This talk has kind of been used a couple different times, but really what I want you to learn is that this tool set is designed really for anybody doing basically anything that's new to them. My own background has kind of bounced around all over the place. The Marine Corps taught me spreadsheets, and I dare say it, personal and professional leadership. My career in investment management has been very valuable to me in lots of different ways. It taught me personal finance and project finance. It also got me interested in energy from the grid. This was long before I'd ever heard of space-based solar power, but it is where I started hearing about connected systems that would eventually lead to the internet, connected electrical grids, connected water grids. I started an internet company back in the days when they called them internet companies, .coms. That taught me the first piece I really needed to know about advanced technology and how to operate with speed. I think many of you know that real estate has been a very important part, both good and bad, of my personal story, and really highlighted the need for a stable foundation. And then finally, all of those things led me to the commercial space sector that I have always been interested in, but never had the ability to work on until about 20 years ago. So those are my earliest days. Most people know about the space elevator from these kinds of pop sci, pop culture magazines. This is what most people think of when they think of a space elevator. It's really interesting to note that this came out while Edwards and I were working on the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts research paper. But this was my start. This was my start in space. And if you start in space with a space elevator, you can't do quote unquote mundane projects very gracefully. So this has both been my blessing and my curse here. And then eventually over time shifted to focus on the lunar elevator. Trying to understand the business of what this thing might be, not just the technology, not just the mechanics of it, but ultimately how do you pay for it and how does it pay those investors back? That is a very tricky question, almost as complicated as the engineering itself. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the lunar elevator. I suspect you probably already know that, but here's the Earth. Here, this little dot is to scale. That's the moon. This right here is the gravitational middle, not the physical middle, right? Gravitational middle. And if you launch a rocket out to the Lagrange point, drop a string down to the surface of the moon, pull it back through the Lagrange point towards, but not touching the Earth, this line is basically held in place by the gravity of the Earth. And if you do that, you can make a giant space station. So this becomes a hub of the solar system. It's super easy, energetically very cheap to get out to Mars and the asteroids. But it's also super important to go back and forth to the lunar surface. We've taken the hard part of soft landing on the moon out of the system. So that's that big idea. So what is this Numenia process? Well, don't get hung up on the name. Numenia is Old Greek, ancient Greek for new moon. It is not a business planning tool, but it will help your business plan be stronger. It's not a marketing tool, but it'll help your marketing plan be stronger. It's not a project management tool, but it will help your projects flow smoother. Really what it is a set of questions and ideas to make you understand your project better. That's really what it's for. As I said a minute ago, its origins have been around for a long time, going back nearly 2 decades, over 2 decades. And the reason it exists is to help me work on both the Earth elevator and the lunar elevator. I've applied it to many other things, to a fintech company, to a transportation company, to a suite of Airbnbs. It's a very versatile product that can be used by a lot of different people. But I want the space community to understand it. I'm pretty well known for this phrase here. There's a profound difference between difficult, very, very hard, and impossible. What's not on the screen is the rest of that quote goes, and it is vital to know the difference. And I post that because whenever you're doing something new, whether it's, a lemonade stand when my brother and I were in the 5th grade, or building an elevator on the moon, it is a new complex compound problem. It has lots of moving parts. You don't have the experience to know necessarily what you're doing, and you have to figure out how to just get your arms around it. So that's where this tool set kind of got its start. There's a lot of parts to this. We're going to go through each one pretty carefully, pretty detailed. And because there are so many parts, it's also very thorough. So my hope is that if you're watching this, you'll rewatch it to catch the pieces that you missed, and build these pieces sequentially. This is very much a hierarchical system. So we'll start with compass philosophies. When you are lost in the woods, a compass is your best friend. And as somebody who has built big companies and little ones, who's helped big companies and little ones, knowing where you're going, how you're getting there, and how you act along the way, that's so important. So vision is really this big idea that carries you forward into the future. It might be 5 years away. It might be 25 years away. The mission is kind of day-to-day ops. What are you doing in order to accomplish the mission? And the values are who are you as an organization? If you were a person, would somebody want to buy you a beer? Would you be a good citizen of the world? So what are your values as you are trying to accomplish your vision? And I use something pretty different with this. I take the vision, mission, values as they've been created, a sentence or two for each one. I distill them down to their keywords, and then we prioritize the keywords. And it's really important to understand that how you reconstruct those keywords will make a different kind of organization. For example, if you had the same 3 words, fast, fair, and money, and you put them in a different order, you get a different result. Y Combinator Company, Dropbox, was only focused on being fast. Their only product when they left the accelerator was a really, really brilliant video. The video went viral overnight. They put a lot of promotion into that video. And because of it, they got millions and millions and millions of signups. That's what they used for their proof when they went to the investors, and that's how they got the money. So they were focused on fast. Kickstarter has always been focused on what was good for the creator. And they could have cashed in really in the earliest days of crowdfunding. That organization's now nearly 15 years old, got to be north of maybe $10 billion. I don't know how many. Don't quote me on that. But they have raised a lot of money for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of creators. They were focused on fair, and in fact, their company structure is a B Corp, a beneficial corporation, because they did not want to get sucked into the Silicon Valley money machine. So even though fast, fair, and money and fair, fast, and money are the same words in a different order, you wind up with 2 vastly different companies. And it's true if you prioritize money over fair, right? The simplest thing is just simply go rob a bank. Uh, there's a lot of things you can do that are a lot easier than building a startup, even as big as Dropbox and Kickstarter are. So prioritizing your keywords, once you've identified your vision, mission, values, break them down, and then reassemble them. You don't have to worry about the sentence structures of anything, but what is most important to you, and then order them. That's a really interesting exercise, and no two people are going to do it the same way. So pretty worthwhile to do that. The next stage of the Do Media process is post: policies, objectives, strategies, tactics, and temporal time. If you can imagine yourself at that center of this pentagon, everything else is kind of flowing out from that. So whatever your project is, there are policies that you must adhere to. It's not optional. It's not, simple sometimes, but those policies are the coloring, the lines in which you have to color. You're going to create objectives around each of the keywords that we just prioritized. Your vision, mission, values. We're going to create objectives out of that. We're going to use time as an ally. We're going to try to find examples in history of something similar, and how can you use the lessons of the past to help you understand your present and your future. And ultimately, tactics and strategy, that's business school 101 and it's warfare 101. So how do you operate? So your policies are going to be broken down really by jurisdiction. If we're trying to build an elevator on the moon, there are in fact rules at the international, super regional, and global level that we have to adhere to. But on the hyper local level, I'm in an office just outside of Seattle and Tacoma. There are rules that my city, county, and state impose on me as well. So understanding what jurisdictions and what policies apply to you is really, really important. And getting that wrong can have some terrible consequences. Once you've identified your policies, you're going to take your keywords and try to develop some objectives around those keywords. What are your key performance indicators? What are your key results that you're looking for? And then how do you create SMART goals: strategic, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely? How do you create SMART goals around each one of your objectives? If you built some vision, mission, values, maybe you've got one or two sentences for each. That might be 15 to 30 keywords, which means 15 to 30 individual objectives. And then there's the element of what are you doing now to accomplish your vision 5 years from now, 25 years from now. There's going to be overarching strategies. There are, and those might not change over the course of time, right? Their strategies very rarely change. Tactics, how you approach that, change. And then skirmishes, no one ever talks about that, but that's the day-to-day stuff you have to do in order to stay true to your vision, operate within your mission, and keep true to your values. There are lots and lots of business books that can really dig deep into strategy and tactics. Rarely do they get down to the skirmish level. Temporal. I'm a pretty big believer in trying to learn lessons from the past so that you do not make the same errors, and learn lessons from the past so that you can copy the successes that you admire. And I think it's pretty cyclical. So You know, try to always know where you actually are. What is the state of the art and your current impact? What's affecting you? What are you able to affect? Okay, so Compass philosophies, that's pretty much business school 101. Policies, objectives, strategy, and tactics. I throw some curveballs in there, but that's pretty basic stuff. This next piece, the action matrix, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different, and for better or for worse, that most of this stuff is pretty unique. As a how to construct this, if you can imagine stakeholders at the top of a spreadsheet, and then challenges down the side of a spreadsheet, and then where those two things intersect, that's where you put goals, investments, and tasks. Okay. So we're gonna dig a little bit deeper into that. But they go together. It's really important. Yes, we're going to take each one of these individually, but this action matrix is definitely designed to be operated as a cohesive set. Stakeholders is first. And the stakeholder is basically anybody who cares, right? A person or group that has an investment, share, or interest in something. Who cares about what you're doing? Not everybody does, right? But some people do. So you have to identify who cares, and those are your stakeholders. And how you manage stakeholders is the fastest way to grow or fail. I say that again. The way that you manage your stakeholders is the fastest way to grow or fail. And I have a lot of examples. I'm not going to go into the personal stuff here on the screen, but I have a lot of examples for all of this as to why I believe this. But just take from your own history things that were successful and things that were failures, and identify who the stakeholders were when those things happened, and you'll be able to follow the breadcrumbs pretty quickly. So sticking with stakeholders, we're going to look at them in 5 different ways, basically 5 different lenses to understand stakeholders. It's important to note that the stakeholder can be in multiple different buckets. So stance, position, organizational, jurisdiction, and individual stages. And this is the whole of how we evaluate stakeholders. So it's complicated, and I don't want to oversimplify it. And let's face it, y'all, we're trying to build stuff for space, so we should be comfortable with complicated. Stance. Are they trying to help you, or are they trying to hurt you? Are they undecided, right? Have they made up their mind? Is their role strictly as an observer? And a few moments ago, I said a stakeholder is somebody who cares, and now I'm saying in stance, there's ambivalence. The IRS does not care whether or not I succeed in building an elevator on the moon. They do care if I have paid my taxes or not, right? So they can care about some of the things and not all of the things. Observers, the media often are observers in the space community. Their role is to be objective, and they're not supposed to help, and they're not supposed to hinder. So this part is definitely it's significant to understand the stance of your stakeholders. How are they? Are they in the pro or con columns? Are they on the inside or on the outside of your organization? Most stakeholders are external. But internal stakeholders can do more to grow and or more to harm your organization than anybody else can. Identifying, are they on the inside or the outside, is really important. There are individual stages. How does this person, even though I've got quote unquote friends in high places, the individual is the person that has gotten interested in our project. They don't necessarily represent the entirety of the organization, right? So how do you handle individuals? Are they not a fan? Are they curious? Are they committed? And how do you move them from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen? We're in the earliest days building an elevator on the moon. You can imagine we had a lot of skeptics. How did we respond to those skeptics? Well, we tended to respond with documented evidence of our findings and be able to back that up. And we could move a skeptic into passive fan, into interested, and then ultimately into committed and active support. So there's definitely an art to that. There's definitely an art to this management process, but it's really but before you can do that, you have to figure out which bucket they're in. And this one's always been really interesting to me because this one was actually something I didn't learn until after the first version of Liftport crashed. I was able to use it a little bit in the second version, and I was just beginning to use it in the third version when COVID hit. And I've never really been able to act on this, but individuals become communities, and those communities have power, right? So a blob on the network, just one person, if they share something in common, they can become a community, a herd. Now, a herd is just a group of similar things, but they don't necessarily have a direction. A horde is going in a direction, but the horde isn't necessarily leaderless. A horde doesn't necessarily have a leader. A mob has a leader and is going a direction. That leader now becomes a node representing the community in their mob. And if you have enough nodes, you can build a network. And if you have enough networks, you can build a network of networks. And every political campaign that I'm aware of operates this way. This is a relatively recent understanding, only in the last few years. I started to understand it after my failed Kickstarter, but I didn't know how to harness it. So this is something I'm really anxious to start working with, but don't necessarily know how to do it just yet. So I'm not going to try and pretend to be an expert in this, but this is something that's relatively new. I was going to start it just prior to COVID. The whole world caught on fire. It was kind of a tool set that I haven't been able to act on yet. And then how is the stakeholder organized? You operate differently if it's a government versus a nonprofit versus a corporation. That's really important. And then finally, this is a slide that we've already seen before, but from a different perspective. Before, when it was talking about policies, those were, your job is to learn the rules that affect you and then stay within the lines. In this context, what do they need from you? What do these jurisdictions and policies need for you to comply with? And that becomes a stakeholder element. Okay. The next piece of the action matrix is challenges. And this one I have a lot of stories about, which I'm not going to get into, but this was one of the main things I discovered when I was first working on the elevator with Dr. Edwards. He was very focused and fixated on the hardware, which he should have been. His background is a PhD in physics, so that's where he should have been. My argument was that he could have all of the parts sitting in a warehouse, but that didn't mean he could build it because the business outreach and framework elements had not been resolved, and therefore it wasn't buildable. And so that was what I consider my big contributions, was to start thinking about these, what I refer to as the fuzzy problems. But these are problems in all of the space sector. And I try to make this hierarchical. If the end goal is hardware in space, that should probably be at the top. But you could make strong arguments that business and framework should be higher up. So I'm not committed to this particular hierarchy, but I do want everybody to understand that the things that we're doing must respond to these set of challenges. And each of these challenges are broken into smaller subsets. So with the Earth elevator, you needed breakthroughs in order to build the string. That wasn't the only breakthrough you needed, but that was the one that everybody talked about. And there were science and discovery elements there. Liftport created strings out of carbon nanotubes. We were one of the first labs in the world to start doing that kind of work. And even though our stuff was not quote unquote strong string, it wasn't. We did have some breakthroughs, but those breakthroughs that stay at the lab level are not useful. You have to move them through higher levels of engineering until eventually they can mass produce them and scale them. And if you can't get your tech out of the lab and into the world, your tech doesn't help anyone. So we have seen this in the space sector many, many times. I worked on a project about 12 years ago that was making claims about space-based solar power and space-based energy. And they were claiming capabilities that they read about in the newspaper. But when you call the lab and say, hey, I need 8 gigawatts of power, they would laugh because they were able to make, I forget the number, 200 kilowatts every 6 months. I mean, it was ridiculous. There's so many zeros off of what they were trying to do. So scaling, super hard problem, especially in the space sector. How do you pay for it? What are we trying to do? And that's kind of what I stumbled into this morning on my investor briefing. I hesitate to call it a pitch. It was more like an investor briefing. But how do you pay for it? What's your return on investment? How do you operate this thing that you're doing? And this is true whether it's a government project, an academic project, a defense project, or a commercial project. These are all true. How do you pay for it? How do you operate and manage the project? How do you tell the story? For the record, I invented this tool set before there was such a thing as Twitter. It was around the same time that Facebook was available, but only in restricted .edu domain names. And MySpace was a thing, but it wasn't a very big thing. And so this used to say social media, and I changed it because I didn't want people to think, oh, it's social media. No, this is how do you talk to the press in a way that amplifies your story? How do the media tell the rest of the world what you're doing so that you get more stakeholders, more people that care? How do you tell your story in an cultural or educational way? Liftport has had many, many, many exhibits in many museums. The largest is the American Museum of Natural History. And then how do you get politicians and governments behind what you're doing, right? I mean, it's one thing for me to say, I've given some lectures to the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force. It's not the same to say Space Force backs my project, right? Those aren't the same thing. So how do you use outreach to policies and political groups and governments in order to achieve the goals that you're aiming for? There's currently a brand new law circulating in Capitol Hill right now that should probably be very good for the commercial space sector. It hasn't been enacted yet. Don't know if it's going to be. Those folks have other things on their mind right now. But those laws that are enacted in Washington, D.C. have ripple effects around the world. And the Belt and Roads Initiative that China's been operating off of for 10 years has ripple effects around the world as well. So how do you tell your story? And then in America, if you can't insure it, you cannot build it. That was a lesson I learned an awful long time ago. But the framework of this, the legal, the financial, the insurance, the regulatory, the policy, both definitions of environmental, from the air that you're breathing and the orbital debris up above to the social environment. And in this case, the military has a lot to say about what we do in space. So those are the four elements: hardware, business, outreach, and framework. And I did this morning. That's what I did this morning. I got so fixated on the cool gee whiz elements of the hardware that I did not address the business elements sufficiently. So, I'm going to eat my own medicine and take my own medicine and learn from that. So once you've gone through all of those elements, compass philosophies, policies, objectives, strategies, and tactics, and time, stakeholders, stance, position, jurisdiction, organizational and individual stages, and finally, challenges, hardware, business, outreach, and framework. Once you've done all of these, because remember I said this is hierarchical, you have to do these steps in order, then and only then do you start getting into goals, investments, and tasks. And goals, investments, and tasks is the simplest part because ultimately it's just the to-do list. It's a to-do list that is rolling. I usually operate on a 30-day to-do list based on how you are responding to your stakeholders and challenges. So you build it out for weeks or months in advance. You decide how much capital and what kind of capital. And yeah, we always think about financial capital, but we're doing space stuff, and natural capital is relevant, right? You're dealing with frequency allocations from at the lowest level, the FCC, but then the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, acts as your conduit and your lead agency to talk to Commerce and NOAA and Department of Defense and I'm forgetting one, State Department. And ultimately, it goes to the International Telecommunications Union. So there are natural capital components to what we're working on. What are the human intellectual capital components? So really the question is, how much are you going to spend of your scarce capital in order to accomplish this task? And then finally, the tasks, the to-do list. What are the things you're going to do? How do you prioritize it? How do you schedule it? And then the follow-up is, did it get checked off the list? So those are the parts. That's the Numenia process. This is the stuff that I've been operating with for many years. It's not easy. Sometimes it's not fun. Not everything in here is formalized. It definitely is a moving target, and it takes time to do this stuff. But if you do it, you're going to understand your project in an intimacy level that will allow you to take action in ways that are unexpected. I promise you that. So that's going to be it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. This has been on my mind a lot today, and I'm happy to take any questions. Just post them in the video comments. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, y'all. Appreciate y'all being here. Thank you. Bye-bye.